the many submarkets and really unpack it. And we're trying to get a broader overview of every layer. We've kind of started with Eric Novak and Jessica Rasmussen from Praxis last month. And we've kind of given the same charge to all the speakers, which is to kind of help us meet our goals and to focus on what can we better advocate through the broader AIA and its mission, and also how can the architecture community as designers better contribute and or get involved in the production of affordable housing, in particular through design and the technical skills that architects bring. So from Eric last month, he told us about trends, legislative initiatives, and then specific needs, what he's working on currently. I focused about the need to get broader commitment on the 9% LIHTC tax credit, and then asked and brought up some ideas. I call them potential catalysts to attract more of the cocktail of tax exempt bond and the 4% credit. We talked about what are some of the tools that are available out there: below market rate land sales, sewer fee relief, property tax exemption, and talked about how these together can make a significant dent in the world. Talked about kind of a favorite cause of all of ours. What can we do better in the zoning entitlement world? One is to entitle more properties as of right for residential, just hasten the process, because a lot of projects just die on the vine. We propose other ideas. They're old, but they're new to Vegas probably. Density bonuses, parking restrictions, because that would definitely will suit affordable housing in particular. So we talked on those tiers, and I think today we have the opportunity. Thank you, Hillary, for joining us today, because we feel like there's a perfect segue in continuity. Because one thing that, or at least recently for me, that we haven't heard about as a committee is on public housing and the initiatives. Some of them are not recent, but we sure would like to hear about the progress on the RAD program, of course. And you have just an incredible background, which also encompasses home, which is also, as we know, one of the tools to kind of hit that gap between public housing and LIHTC as well, and it's just a very flexible resource. You have bring an incredible background here in finance and policy. You were previously with Praxis. I'm really amazed by the educational background. I'm very jealous of your doctorate in geography. I'm always lamenting my children can barely find their way anywhere because they're always relying on global positioning. We just lost our spatial awareness of the world that we live in. And also have a master's in resources applied economics, undergraduate degree in economics as well. It's an extraordinary background, and we're always hunting and fishing for greater sources of inspiration and broad overviews as we seek in a specific direction, kind of how to move the committee. That's a big focus of the year. So, thank you for joining us today. Very blessed that you're able to, and appreciate your time in advance. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate being invited back and talking with this group again now that I'm in my new role. I hope that the presentation is inspirational, but I'm a little worried now. But
don't be worried. It's all very cool.
I'll do my best. And I do have a PowerPoint, so I will go ahead and try and share my screen, and hopefully it works. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yep, see it.
I'm gonna try and move the other square so that I could read some of what's on it too. So thank you again for inviting me back to talk with this group. I know that I had joined you several times last year and talked about things. And at that time, I was in my prior position at Praxis, moved to the Reno Housing Authority as its new executive director about 6 months ago. So in some ways, I'm still kind of getting my arms around things and getting settled, but have kind of jumped right in because the Reno Housing Authority had previously operated much more like a traditional housing authority and really hadn't explored asset repositioning and new development. And then the board shifted its focus and decided that it did want to explore asset repositioning, wanted to explore playing a larger role within Washoe County and our community and bringing solutions for the affordable housing issues and crisis that we're having. And so that was part of bringing me on board, was so that this way I could bring my experience and background in affordable housing programs and finance to the agency to kind of help move the agency in that direction. So excited to join you today to kind of tell you a bit more about the Reno Housing Authority, about what we're doing and the tools that we're using. I'm also familiar with Sunra and the projects that they've been doing from my prior role, so could talk a little bit about some of the tools that they're also utilizing to reposition and preserve their portfolio as well, and then answer any questions that you might have. So just to give you a little bit of background, we're the City of Reno Housing Authority, but we're called Reno Housing Authority, or RHA, but we actually serve Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County. So we were established in 1943, so we're one of the oldest housing authorities in the state, and initially our service area was just the City of Reno, but we have grown over time to provide services for the entire county. We have 8 public housing properties that encompass 750 units. Part of our portfolio is geared towards seniors and disabled, and then we have other public housing properties that are specifically set aside for families. In addition to that, we also have what we call our expanded housing options, which is really in the NSP era. So I'm trying to think of timeframes. Early 2000s, the Reno Housing Authority was awarded about $22 million in Neighborhood Stabilization Program, or NSP funds. And so as part of that, the authority actively went out and purchased multifamily complexes throughout the region. And we now have 166 scattered site single family homes that we rent. And then on top of that, we have a number of multifamily complexes that we also own and operate, and provide additional affordable housing options throughout the region. On top of that, we administer the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So our voucher program is much smaller than Sunra's. So at Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority, they have slightly over 11,000 Section 8 vouchers, and then they have specialty vouchers, including their VASH and then some other specialty vouchers. We have about 2,500 Housing Choice vouchers. So significantly less, and then we have 416 VASH vouchers, and then on top of that we have 138 emergency housing vouchers, and then some other smaller specialty vouchers as well. We operate without any local funding, So all of our funding comes either from the federal government or from non-restricted or other sources that we go out and raise. The mission of the Housing Authority is really to provide fair, sustainable, quality housing in diverse neighborhoods throughout Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County. And we also use that as a stable foundation where low-income families then can pursue their economic opportunities, become self-sufficient, and improve their quality of life. So going along with our housing portfolio, we also have a very robust resident services department that provides workforce development programming, senior programming, and now we have added a very strong youth component to that. So we have our Start Smart program, for example, where we're working with high school age youth to acquire skills in terms of finance, investing, budgeting, banking, and other related topics. And then as they go through the program and advance, they could earn financial incentives, and they could actually graduate if they're in the program for the full 4 years with over or close to about $5,000 that they could then use to kind of pursue either their career or an apprenticeship or other types of educational opportunities. So very excited about that program. We actually have our first graduating class this year, and we're also going to be awarding 3 $10,000 scholarships to some of our youth as part of that. Moving from kind of an overview of the authority to kind of an overview of asset repositioning and its goals, I think that we all kind of talk about asset repositioning, and it's like, well, what is asset repositioning, and kind of why do we do it, and why would we look at it? And as I mentioned, Sunra kind of engaged in asset repositioning and started that asset repositioning process a lot earlier than the Reno Housing Authority. And we followed kind of a similar path where we worked with actually in this case Praxis consulting group. I was at Praxis at the time to complete a portfolio analysis to kind of talk about and look at, okay, how are our properties operating? What are the capital needs at those properties? And then how could we utilize tools that are available to reposition our properties so that we could address critical housing needs and preserve these properties going forward. So our properties are an extremely important part of the housing stock and portfolio in our communities. They primarily serve households that have incomes up to 50% of area median income, and have an extremely high proportion of population that's actually anywhere from 0 to 30% of area median income. So the public housing agencies really, their housing portfolio meet the need of our extremely low income residents much better than many other developers are able to. So this is critical housing in our communities, and it's really important that we look at ways that we could preserve it. A lot of public housing was built many years ago, has not undergone any kind of major modernization or rehabilitation, and really has a high backlog of needs just based on the fact that there's not enough capital funds that are provided in any given year to really address all of the needs of the public housing stock. And so it's kind of more of a Band-Aid approach of what's the most critical need so that we could address it. Nationwide, the National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates that there's approximately a $70 billion backlog in public housing capital needs that address maintenance and other repair issues. And for the Reno Housing Authority, we were over about 25 million, and we receive, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 3 million in any given year in capital funds. So one of the main reasons that we look at asset repositioning is to preserve the housing and be able to address in a much more holistic manner the critical needs of our housing portfolio. Another reason to look at asset repositioning is really to move to a more stable funding platform. So at the federal level, there has been over time a decrease in the amount of funding to support public housing, either on the capital fund side or the operating side, or both of those funding streams. And so it makes it difficult to not only keep up with the maintenance, but to operate these properties over the long term. And what we've seen is at a federal level, if you can move off of public housing, off of the public housing platform and into primarily the Section 8 funding platform, that has been a much more stably funded operating subsidy. It also comes with annual operating cost adjustment factor increases. So there's more ability on an annual basis to increase the amount of income and revenue that you're getting from those properties. One of the other issues is addressing energy efficiency and climate resilience. And I know that this is something that nationally the AIA is looking at as well. And so many of these properties, as I mentioned, were built in the 60s, 70s, they're 50, 60 plus years old. And so they really don't include a lot of energy efficiency improvements. Some of the units don't have proper heating or air conditioning units in them. All of those types of things that could improve the living environment for our tenants. So this is a way to move in that direction. Building on that is kind of housing and health. So looking at how we address issues regarding lead or regarding asbestos that's in these properties, and making just for healthier environments and communities for our children and for our seniors that live in and reside with us. And then over time, our population has really aged in some of our senior communities. A lot of times, once a senior moves into our properties, they just don't have the financial means to really move out and into other housing. They have fixed incomes and they're very limited. And so going through asset repositioning also allows us to look at how do we need to change our properties to allow for that aging in place and incorporate some accessibility or other features that kind of best meet our seniors' needs, not only when they move into our housing developments, but as they continue to reside in those developments over time. And that could be anything, like I said, from looking at accessibility improvements to looking at amenities like walking paths that help for folks that might have beginning or advanced issues with dementia, looking at trauma-informed housing, depending upon the population that we're serving, all of those types of things. So what are some of the key tools that we could use to help us with repositioning our public housing portfolio? And I've just outlined 4 here. So there are some additional tools, but these are kind of the main 4 that we're looking at the Reno Housing Authority. And these are some of the main tools that actually Senra is using as well. And so I just wanted to key in on those. One of the tools that just recently became available to us is the state's Home Means Nevada initiative funds. And those are really the American Rescue Plan Act state and local fiscal recovery funds. And many of you, if not all of you, are aware that Governor Sisolak's administration had set aside $500 million to invest in affordable housing projects across our state. It's the largest state investment in affordable housing kind of in the history of the state. And we were just so excited and thrilled that that there was that much of an allocation that was provided for our industry. The state held a competitive application round, and the Reno Housing Authority was lucky enough that we received several awards of HM&I funds. And primarily we received one for a new development, but otherwise all of the awards that we received were to help us with repositioning our public housing properties, either through substantial rehabilitation or through complete demolition and rebuilding of those properties. So it's an exciting time for us because, just thinking about the possibilities of what some of our public housing properties could look like and how they could function better, and how they could really better integrate within the built environment around it is, exciting to me, exciting to our staff, and exciting to our board. So I think all things have kind of aligned for us. One of the things that we're looking at to really do that also is RAD, and RAD stands for the Rental Assistance Demonstration Project. It was developed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and rolled out in 2012. And really the main goal of it was to kind of work with public housing authorities to address their public housing funding shortfalls. So what RAD does is it allows public housing authorities to convert their public housing subsidy into a Section 8 project-based subsidy. So it is, from a federal government standpoint, revenue neutral, and that was like a big selling point for the federal government, that it really wouldn't cost them anything to roll out and implement this project. And the way that it's revenue neutral on their end is it really looks at, okay, for example, for I'll just take one of our public housing properties, our Silverado. It gets, and I'm just going to throw out numbers, say $200 per month in operating subsidy, $300 per month in capital funds, and then $100 per month in tenant contributions. So that's $600 per month, and it basically kind of monetizes that into a project-based subsidy rent. So the RAD project-based subsidy rents are different than if you just had a Section 8 housing choice voucher that was project-based to a property and utilized the housing authority's payment standards. And so that's how they keep it revenue neutral, because it basically just says, okay, instead of us giving you all of these funding streams year after year, we're just gonna anticipate what that would cost in a rent, and that's going to be the rent associated with that, the monthly rent associated with that property. What that does, though, is on a financing, as a financing tool, it gives the housing authorities the ability to then kind of leverage that, and through leveraging that, bring additional private or public resources to that property to actually undertake a much deeper and comprehensive level of either rehabilitation or development than we would be able to do just utilizing, annual capital fund to do that. And one of the other things is that public housing authorities are not allowed to have debt on public housing properties. But if you go through a RAD conversion and move from the public housing platform to this, now the Section 8 project-based platform, you could actually also, as part of that leveraging now, put debt on that property. So that's another way that you could bring additional resources to the property to help with undertaking that renovation. Initially, when RAD was authorized, it was only authorized for 60,000 units. Over time, that RAD cap, as we call it, has been expanded. And so now it's at 455,000 units. Both the Obama administration and the Trump administration had asked for that cap to be removed. But at this point, Congress has not removed that cap, but that is something that as we continue to get closer and closer to that cap and other public housing authorities want to explore and maybe utilize RAD, will have to be looked at. Another tool that I have listed here is the HUD Section 18 program, and that's really the demo disposition program, and that was authorized under Section 18 of the Housing Act of 1937. And while for RAD, you apply through HUD's Office of Recapitalization, for Section 18, you apply through HUD's Special Application Center. And what they do is they look at your project and they evaluate whether or not the project should be approved for either demolition or disposition based on certain standards that they have. And primarily it's looking at whether or not your project meets their definition of obsolescence. And so that definition of obsolescence is pretty broad, but can encompass things like structural deficiencies at the property, the need to update and upgrade all of the major systems at that property. It could also look at more economic or social factors. So has there been a shift in the neighborhood over time since that public housing was developed that no longer makes that neighborhood suitable for this public housing? Is there anything that impacts the marketability of this project so it has lower leasing levels, for example, that inhibit or prohibit the housing authority from best utilizing that asset? So there's a variety of things that HUD looks at when they're trying to determine obsolescence. And then they also have some financial standards. So if it's going to take you over 62.5% of money of the housing replacement cost to redevelop that property, then HUD doesn't see it as a worthwhile investment, and that would trigger obsolescence as well. And so through this program, what you could do is actually remove those public housing units from the public housing portfolio. And then you could get what's called tenant protection vouchers, which are like Section 8 vouchers that you could either project base back to the project, which again helps you then leverage money to undertake your development, or you could just provide vouchers and then demolish and take time to think about how you want to redevelop that property. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about was just other affordable housing programs. And so David had mentioned some of those, which are some of our mainstream programs like HOME. So at the local level, the majority of these projects, as they're going through conversion, seek home funds. Otherwise, public housing is not allowed to layer home funds on top of public housing. But there's other things like state tax credits that are now available for properties that are going through repositioning, state trust funds, national housing trust funds, and then like down in Clark County, they now have the Clark County funds that they've made available for housing projects as well. So we're always looking at what other public or private resources we could bring to the table to kind of help with repositioning. So how does some of this overlap with AIA's policy focus? So, some of the things that we're looking at are how can we rehab or redevelop our projects so that they integrate better with the built environment. And obviously that's something that's of significance and importance to architects and to the AIA nationally. I talked about resilient design, so looking at how we could really build these projects so that for the next 30, 50 years of their life, they can withstand some of the climate change that we know is happening around us, so that it's resilient design just in terms of energy efficiency improvements, those types of things. One of the things is that a lot of our funding is time sensitive. So tax credits are time sensitive. The bond financing is time sensitive. The Home Means Nevada funds are time sensitive. And so really looking at within the processes and timeframes that we utilize, how do we have enough time to sit back and strategically think about some of the issues that have to do with design and architecture and meeting some of the other goals, and how could affordable housing developers work with AIA as champions to kind of help us advocate for more time to go through these processes. And then equity and inclusion. So I talked about, making our projects more accessible, looking at how we could use our projects as anchors in community development, so that this way, we're really building neighborhoods that not only work best for our residents, but bring additional amenities and other features, so that this way they help build and revitalize the community around them. So a couple of things that AIA could do to kind of help support asset repositioning. One, support expansion of the HUD asset repositioning strategies. So like I mentioned, the removal of the RAD cap. HUD has rolled out like several programs over time. There's now the RAD Section 18 blend program. So, support of the different types of programs that allow us to best meet the needs of our local communities and our properties by utilizing the tool that best fits that asset. Supporting allocation for an adequate amount of tenant protection vouchers and new vouchers. So, Section 18 disposition, part of what makes it successful is being able to get tenant protection vouchers on the back end and then project base those back to the property so that we could leverage against them. At one point a few years ago, HUD had a lot of tenant protection vouchers and was, very willing to provide those. That's no longer the case. And so, just advocating to make sure that there are enough tenant protection vouchers so that as properties move through the Section 18 process, they could receive those vouchers, because without those vouchers, it won't be successful. Support initiatives to extend the time to commit and use the ARPA monies. So all of a sudden in our state, we are going to have like a slew of projects looking to move forward, because we're all under that same time frame of having to, close on our finances by December 31st of 2024, and then fully expend those funds by December 31st of 2026. And we're all going to be needing supplies, and there's still supply shortages, and we're all going to be needing general contractors, and then there's still labor supply shortages. And so, I think that at some point in time, the federal government is going to have to look at this, and then having partners and kind of advocating as to why it's important that we have adequate time to get all of these projects moving and placed in service. Supporting proposed changes to the tax exempt bond program for affordable housing development. I think Eric may have touched on this topic when he talked last month, but really our state for the first time is in like a competitive situation for tax exempt bond cap. And so to really have the ability to move as many projects forward as we can, both for repositioning and then just for our affordable housing industry in general, changes to the tax exempt bond program that require less bond cap for each project, that allow for more projects to move forward would be very helpful. And then as architects, I know that there are folks on this call that have worked with public housing authorities on these types of projects. So, providing that peer-to-peer assistance to others that may be now getting involved in public housing asset repositioning or redevelopment, and kind of sharing those best practices or how to overcome some of the challenges regarding time or limited resources would be very helpful and valuable to our industry as a whole. And I think with that, I am through with my overview, but more than happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks, Hillary. Appreciate that. That's a lot of stuff.
Yes.
Anyone else? Anyone have questions before I start asking?
I feel like with affordable housing, there's just always a lot of.
I think you're right, because we all went, some of us went to the Housing Coalition's workshop a couple weeks ago. And, I've heard most of that stuff before, and I've seen pro formas, and even in some of the stuff I'm involved in, I see the pro formas and I think, oh yeah, but other people do that, right? And here, how rude, here I am, hi. And I think, oh, other people do that, and I don't really need to know that, but the more I hear it, the better it is for me to understand what our part is in all of that. So I appreciate, like, every time we learn something more, I appreciate that. So when you were here back in 21 talking about funding resources, ooh, that was just like overwhelming, right? And it's in the year and a half, almost 2 years since you were here last, it's starting to come together. So questions from anyone? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and there's so many different facets of it as well, because there's the whole public housing piece, and then there's the tax credit piece, and there's naturally occurring affordable housing now, as they call it. And so there's just, there's a lot, but, it's just, to me, so exciting that there are all of these different types of projects that are moving forward, because that's what we need to have a healthy housing continuum for folks in our community.
True. Questions from anyone? Okay, then I'm going to ask. So we've been having these discussions about prevailing wage and Davis-Bacon funding. And today, David and I were texting about an article he had read on modular housing and Davis-Bacon, and how all that's coming around. We've been talking about how Davis-Bacon may or will affect off-site or factory built, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of wondering, like, where's this all going? Like, are we, for projects we've had, prevailing wage keeps coming up, and then the unions got involved and have scared off some of, like, framers or painters or whatever. And so the union guys are getting the work, and not that we don't think that people deserve to get paid, but, like, do you see anything coming on your side of things? I mean, you've been on Praxis side, and you've been on the housing side.
So for public housing authorities, we are subject to procurement, and we are subject to Davis-Bacon. So most of the time, if you're working with a public housing authority, you're going to be utilizing Davis-Bacon wage rates as part of the project. Where we haven't seen it as much before is in regular tax credit or home funded projects. And because of the requirements of the Home Means Nevada initiative funds, that's where we may see some of those projects that wouldn't typically utilize Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage rates move into having to use those. And really, depending on who you talk to right now, and I guess what trades you're looking at, we've heard that some trades are significantly more using Davis-Bacon, and some, just because of our market right now, there's really not much of a cost differential. But overall, what it will do is, as it adds additional cost to the project, is really just cause us to either value engineer or just limit the amount of work that we could do at a property. So it's just that, that trade-off.
I guess the question there, I mean, in fact, because of the class of construction that typically builds multifamily residential, I mean, imposing Davis-Bacon and certainly the local prevailing wage tied to Home Means Nevada, I mean, to my mind, that's a 30 to 50% increase in cost, regardless of what anyone says about the marginal difference in the rates. It's not. That's not what the effect is. I'm a builder. I know what this is. So is this not actually killing projects?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, we are definitely anticipating that it is, going to impact the cost of the hard costs associated with our projects. And and we're trying to think strategically about what does that mean, like what might have to fall off. And the unfortunate part is, a lot of times what falls off is kind of the architectural detail, which is something that everybody wants, because everybody wants these projects to kind of integrate well within the neighborhood, to have architectural design features, to and really for the folks that live there, to provide kind of a pride and sense of community and those types of things as well. But unfortunately, a lot of times those are the first things to go, or things like the stucco on the outside, or the gazebos, or other different types of things that enhance that property. And it's unfortunate, but hard decisions sometimes have to be made, just because we have limited funding, unless we could identify and then bring in another funding source.
Yeah,
and I think that they're still having conversations, last I heard, to try and determine whether or not state prevailing wage would apply to the Home Means Nevada project. So I think that that's still something that's under discussion.
Yeah, and put in a question that I was kind of leading up to anyway, which is, sorry, I'm having some feedback on this side. Hold on a second.
Keith.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So when we're talking about shop fabrication, or panelized modular components, can we offset the prevailing wages that way, versus the field erection? But I think that's one of the things David and I were texting about this morning, was how all that's going to get affected, right? And that prevailing wage is moving into shop fabrication. I'm not sure how we're going to get any offsets. All I see is projects going back to the funding resources, asking for more money to cover, more and more things. It's just unfortunate.
Well, and that's getting harder too, just because the current cost of construction and of putting these projects together is very expensive. And so, statewide, the costs that we're expending per unit is much higher than what we've seen in the past. And, you know, at some point, you have to step back and say, how, you know, how can we resolve this? And so, you know, we used to be able to all in hard and soft costs, build a unit for under 200,000, then it was 250,000, then it was 300,000, and now we have projects that are north of $400,000 per unit. And so it, you know, at some point it becomes kind of a policy issue of, one, how many units do we want, and two, kind of what is the policy objective.
Right. And so what do you know about how, well, like Nevada Housing Coalition, or how can we help with that to help on that policy position? Like, can we make a change to that? Can, you know, because it's you're kind of stuck, right, between a rock and a hard place. You're like, oh, people, you want the cost to be less, but we also want people to be paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like,
Yeah,
where's the
you
give?
know, I think it's just staying, you know, involved in those discussions and providing kind of education and information through the coalition to policymakers. And then really, it's just up to the policymakers as to kind of how they want to balance all of the competing needs of our state.
Mhm. I mean, ultimately, it's a battle of lobbyists, right? And because I've been following closely with the Modular Building Institute, right? I mean, they have dedicated their entire budget almost to fighting the expansion of Davis-Bacon, which I can tell you with certainty will eliminate offsite fabrication from being involved in federally funded work. It will make no sense at all. But what they've noted most recently on their website is, hey, let's face it, the unions have a lobbying budget this big, and MBI's $250,000 pales, regardless of how smart they are, and the audience they reach is much smaller.
Yeah, I mean, you know, unfortunately, I think as a field, we're very creative. And so, you know, we've been able to kind of come up with ways to kind of work within the parameters we have to move forward as many units as we can. But, you know, it just gets more and more difficult to meet all of the different policy objectives. The more requirements and constraints that we have. But I do know that, you know, statewide, like I said, the cost of building affordable housing has just continued to increase, and where we used to be able to get, you know, a $1.2 million allocation of tax credits and build 80 units in Southern Nevada. Now, you know, you're lucky if it supports 55 units. So, you know, we just haven't been able to bring as many units to market.
What if we switch gears to a different topic? I'm kind of interested in things about kind of start off with the RAD project, because I also have some personal interest. And at one point, I'd almost been involved in doing RAD conversions in New York City, and didn't do it. So it does fascinate me. Like, you know, public housing is complex. It's not regular real estate because you have a social objective that conflicts in many ways with kind of normal commercial asset management objectives. And your choices. So like one question I have in mind is, are you still able to hit the same target group with the conversion to Section 8, whether it's property or individual based vouchers?
Yeah, so with RAD, all of the residents have a right to return. And so for the most part, yes, but one of the things that I've learned kind of over time doing these is it's really important to understand the population that's there prior to competing or applying for different streams of funding. So, because just because they might qualify under RAD doesn't necessarily mean that that household will qualify under some of your other funding sources. And so it's really important to kind of understand the population that you have on the front end so that you could structure your financing, your income and rent targeting to really best accommodate the population that you have at that property.
You mentioned something else that was kind of interesting on the leverage thing, which may give me some insight, I think, into, like, hypothetically, let's say you have a property functioning, it's operating right now, and you were to convert all those residents to Section 8 vouchers under RED for the same property, and suddenly you could leverage it and do a major capital improvement. Is that scenario and picture right? Is that?
Yeah, so, and a lot of our properties are, currently occupied. So we would be looking at how we could either phase in that rehabilitation so that this way, we don't have to relocate the entire property at once. But otherwise, if we couldn't do that, we would have to relocate all of those residents at once into either other public housing properties or other community housing that's available. And then, for example, like with the Section 8 vouchers, if we did a demo dispo, for example, then with the new payment standards that we could utilize at that property, that's how we could support then additional debt or conventional sources to kind of help raise money for it.
You could apply the same stream to ground up new construction as well, which just leads me to one question. I'll try to make this the last because I don't feel like I should be the only one asking questions. So with the ability to do, this type of ground up development is not always the historical skill set for public housing authorities. So do you do this internally entirely, or do you do this through partnerships?
So no, that's a great question. And so we actually do it. We're looking at it in a variety of ways. So we have some projects where it's a smaller amount of rehab. And so it's something that we could, we have the capacity in-house to do, but then there's larger projects, like, for example, we're talking about demolishing one of our properties and like rebuilding from the ground up. And not only is that a major construction project, but it would also be a bond 4% tax credit project with additional sources of financing layered, which is really something that's much more complex than the Housing Authority has done in the past. And so for a project like that, we are looking at, okay, who could we partner with? So we are looking at getting a development partner to assist us, with that kind of more complex project. And then we always have Praxis actually as our development finance consultant. So we're always able to kind of lean on them as well.
What? Praxis?
Yeah. So.
Keith, you got a question you want to ask?
And it looks like Keith had put a question in the chat about where you could find the affordable housing assets for Northern Nevada. And probably the best place to find that list is with the State Housing Division. And so they maintain kind of a statewide list of all the affordable housing properties. So I would reach out to Betsy Fadali is their economist, and she should have that information.
How do you spell her name?
I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, very good.
Oh, great. So we're gonna have any other questions? Because we're already a little over time, if everyone's good with that. Cool. I don't know where Hillary needs to go.
Well, thank you for having me. I've appreciated your time and the questions. And, if you have anything that comes up, I put my new email address on the last slide too, so feel free to, reach
Yeah,
out.
thanks for that.
Try my best.
Oh, is there a magic bullet type, like 2-bedroom, 2-bath? I think we're talking about dollars, right, Ann? Like, how do we try to meet that dollar amount or
So
make it more
part of
efficient?
what we do is we look at our wait list too, to see kind of where we have the most demand for different types of units. But I will tell you that we don't typically do 2-bedroom, 2-bath because the cost of adding the additional bathroom, we don't receive any additional rent. So there's a 2-bedroom rent, and that's the 2-bedroom rent, whether it's 2-bedroom, 1-bath or 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And so from a financial standpoint, the cost to add the additional bathroom, really the benefit, the cost of adding it doesn't outweigh the benefit.
Because that's also plumbing connections. Even though I think some jurisdictions give those projects a little bit of leeway, it's still a burden on the system.
Yeah, and I know in the last qualified allocation plan hearings, the state of Nevada Housing Division was looking to move away from 2-bedroom, 2-bath units as well, because of funding constraints. And so
I
in
get
an
that,
effort
but
to
such a
try-
good thing.
So,
good when you have a bunch of kids, right? So if you have 3
Yes.
kids, whether you're a couple or a single parent, oh my, trying to get everybody out of the house in the morning.
yeah, and unfortunately, this is one of those areas where it's like trying to balance how to best utilize the monies and bring units to market and still kind of meet the demands and needs of our community members.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to become more creative in how we design those bathrooms, I guess. Maybe. I don't know if there's a whole lot of room for that. So, okay, Ann, challenge. There we go. Challenge. Anyone else? We're already at 6:10. It's a good conversation. It's a whole lot of good information. I wrote down lots of notes. I told you eventually it's going to all sink in, and then you're going to change all the rules. I am concerned about that whole policy thing too with funding. Prevailing wage, man, that is tough.
Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, my understanding is that there's still discussions going on regarding state prevailing wage, Davis-Bacon wage rates, etc. So, we just, like I said, we do our best to kind of work within the parameters that we have, and we understand there's competing policy objectives, and just trying to figure out how we work within those, meet our mission.
And this has been unbelievably informative, and I really feel to a large extent this kind of, in a certain sense, starts to close the loop for us. Seeing the whole spectrum.
Good. Like I said, I'm happy to share the information, and if you have any other questions, reach out, and I'll try my best to answer them. I don't know all of it, but if I don't, then I at least could try and refer you to someone who may have that answer.
I think we're just going to have to bring you in every year to talk about the same thing, or how it's modified every year.
Well, hopefully if I come back next year, I could tell you about how, a number of our projects are moving forward and under construction. So,
that would be cool.
Yes.
That'd be cool.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We all appreciate you joining us again. Let's see, it's 23, so next year's 24. Yeah, that'd be cool.
So, well, have a good evening, everyone, then, and
thank you.
I will
Thank
speak with
you.
you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary.